The dress was still in its garment bag when the text came through. I remember that detail more than almost anything else, that I was standing in my apartment on a Tuesday night with my thumb on the zipper, about to hang up a pale blue dress I'd bought for my sister's engagement party, when my phone buzzed on the counter and my father's name lit up the screen. "Don't come to the party. The guest list is full." That was it. No signature, no softening, not even a lowercase "sorry, honey" tacked onto the end. 2 sentences from the man who raised me, and somehow they landed heavier than anything he'd ever said to my face. I read it 3 times before the words rearranged themselves into something I could actually believe. My name is Meredith Cole. I'm 46 years old, a colonel in the United States Army, and for 3 years I've worked in a classified advisory capacity at the White House, alongside the National Security Council, on matters I've never been able to discuss with anyone, least of all my own family. To them, I wasn't a colonel. I wasn't anything with a title worth repeating over coffee. I was just the daughter who worked for the government, in the same vague, slightly embarrassed tone people use for a relative they can't quite explain. Success, in my father's house, had a name. And it wasn't mine. It was Isla's. My younger sister sells luxury real estate in a city 3 states from Washington, and 6 months ago she got engaged to a man named Weston Calloway III, whose family's name is on half the office buildings downtown. When she called our parents with the news, I could hear the celebration through the phone from my apartment, my mother's laugh, ice against glass, my father's voice booming, "Now that's marrying well." I was happy for her. I want to be clear about that, because what comes next might make it sound otherwise. Isla has always had an ease about her, a warmth people lean toward, and I never resented that. What I quietly carried, if I'm honest, was the silence that followed whenever anyone asked about me. I'd already requested leave for the engagement party. Already bought the dress, pale blue, unremarkable, nothing that might pull a single eye away from my sister, because that had always been the unspoken rule in our house: don't outshine Isla, don't make it about you. I never minded that rule. What I minded, sitting in my car in the White House parking structure that night, engine off, hands still on the wheel, was learning I wasn't even welcome to stand quietly in the back. I typed one word back. Understood. I didn't cry. People expect tears at a moment like that, and I didn't have any to give, just a strange, settled calm, the kind that shows up after you absorb a blow you'd been half expecting your whole life. A young corporal at the gate, Torres, caught my face as I drove back in and asked if everything was all right. Yes, I told him. Because what else was there to say? I had a briefing in the morning, and a country's worth of problems waiting upstairs that had nothing to do with seating charts. I was wrong about how fine it was going to be. I found that out the next evening. My sister's name lit up my phone just after 7. I almost let it go to voicemail, assuming she was calling to smooth things over on our father's behalf, the way she sometimes did. "How could you do this to us?" Her voice cracked on the last word. Not angry, wrecked. "Do what, Isla?" "I haven't done anything." Don't act like you don't know." I genuinely didn't, and something in my voice must have convinced her, because she finally explained. A political weekly, the kind that covers Washington the way other magazines cover Hollywood, had run a feature on a ceremony honoring military advisors behind a classified operation the year before. There was a photo, not posed, not anything I'd asked for, just a group shot taken because protocol required it. Underneath, in small print, Colonel Meredith Cole, Senior Military Advisor, National Security Council. Our father had been in his recliner with that magazine open on his lap. He'd stopped on the page, gone still, read it again. Our mother thought it was a misprint. But he knew my face. He got up without a word, went into the other room, and started calling everyone he could think of who might tell him whether the title meant what it seemed to mean, because none of it matched the daughter he thought he knew. "He thinks you did this on purpose," Isla said. "To embarrass him. Right before my party." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. 20 years of silence about my career, never once a follow-up question, never a moment's curiosity about what special assignment might mean when I used the only phrase I was allowed to use at Christmas dinner. And the instant the truth surfaced without my permission, his first instinct wasn't curiosity. It was suspicion. "Nobody in this family knows what you do," Isla said quietly. "Nobody's ever asked," I said back. She didn't have an answer for that. The truth of it didn't start with a magazine. It started decades earlier, in a two-story house where love came with conditions I felt long before I understood them. My father, Harlan Cole, ran a small insurance agency for 35 years. He wasn't cruel, not in any way you could point to. His was a quieter kind of neglect, the kind that leaves no marks, just a slow accounting of where you ranked. He didn't come to my commissioning. He didn't come when I made captain, or when I pinned on my first set of oak leaves in a small ceremony that no one back home ever mentioned again, while Isla's homecoming nomination got its own line in the family conversation for weeks. "Military doesn't build families," he liked to say, with the weary patience of a man explaining something obvious to someone slow to catch on. "It breaks them apart." He never knew, because he never asked, about the convoy I rerouted overseas based on intelligence nobody else believed, a decision that likely saved 11 lives. He never knew about the field hospital I helped stand up in a province most people couldn't find on a map, or the commendation sitting in a drawer in my apartment, still wrapped in its original paper, because I'd never found an occasion where showing it to him felt like it would matter. You learn, eventually, not to keep bringing gifts to a house where no one opens the door. The knock on my office door came the next morning, just past 11. Priya, no, her name was Naomi, one of the staff who handled our section's scheduling, stepped in with an expression somewhere between amused and alarmed. "Colonel Cole," she said carefully. "Your father is here." He'd shown up at the gate in his good church jacket, hair combed the way he does for occasions he considers important, apparently expecting this would work like any office lobby, give his name, wait a few minutes, have a tense but manageable conversation. It took Secret Service the better part of 40 minutes to confirm that yes, a Colonel Meredith Cole did in fact work in this building, and yes, this man was in fact her father. By the time I walked out to meet him, I found him standing very still by the window, hands clasped, watching everyone who passed nod, greet, acknowledge me before they'd even registered he was there. "Good morning, Colonel." Colonel Cole. A two-star general I'd worked with for months on something I still can't discuss. I watched something shift behind my father's eyes, not dramatic, just a slow recalibration, the look of a man realizing the ground under him wasn't the ground he'd expected. "I didn't know," he said finally, all the certainty gone out of his voice. I had no idea any of this was real. I made myself hold still instead of softening it for him, the way I always had. "You never asked," I said. "Not cruel. Just true." He didn't argue, and that told me more than anything, because arguing was the one thing he always did. "Come to the party," he said instead, his voice cracking on the word. "Please, Meredith." "I'll think about it," I told him, and walked him back to the gate myself, both of us silent the whole way. I told myself for 2 days that I wasn't going. Then Isla called again Thursday night, and this time there was no performance in her voice. "The Callaways know," she said. "About you. About everything." The magazine had made its way, inevitably, into Weston's family, the kind of people who read the political weeklies over breakfast. His mother, Eleanor, had asked Isla about it directly, expecting some charming story about a distinguished sister, and gotten a stammering non-answer instead, because Isla barely knew what to say either. There had been a tense call between the fathers. Talk of postponing the engagement announcement while the Callaways reassessed. Families who hide things at the start tend to keep hiding things, Eleanor had apparently said. I sat with that, and felt something complicated move through me. Not satisfaction, because I never wanted this weight to land on Isla. But underneath it, something closer to clarity. 20 years of being treated as faintly embarrassing, actively hidden from the people whose opinions my father valued most. And now that silence had come due, and it wasn't going to be my father who paid for it. "I need you there," Isla said, her voice breaking in a way that had nothing to do with strategy. Not for Dad. For me. I said yes. I wore the pale blue dress, not the uniform. I told myself I wasn't there to make a point. That lasted about 11 minutes, until a retired Marine colonel in a tweed jacket found me near the terrace and said my name like it meant something. Word moves fast in certain circles. Within 20 minutes, 3 more people had found me, a young naval officer, a veteran's widow, a friend of the family who'd served in the same theater I had. No fanfare. Just a quiet current of recognition moving through the party. I found my father at the edge of the terrace, holding a drink he hadn't touched, watching all of it with an expression I'd never seen on him. Not pride, not yet. Something closer to grief. Grief, I think now, for 20 years spent assuming a version of me that had never existed. He found me 2 hours later, on a stone bench at the edge of the garden. I told people you did paperwork, he said, staring straight ahead. For years. I made you sound small. Why? I asked. I meant it honestly. He was quiet a long time. Because I didn't understand it, he finally said. What it meant, a woman making a career of it. My own father said things about service that I'm ashamed of now, and some of it stuck with me longer than I ever admitted. I think it was easier to assume you'd failed at something than to imagine you were succeeding at something I didn't understand. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. Isla joined us on the grass, careless of her dress. I never once thought you might have been protecting us, she said. Or protecting yourself. I told them about the packages then, 11 years of anonymous boxes sent to our parents' house every December. Good coffee. A blanket. Tickets to a show. No note, no return address, because I hadn't wanted to create one more moment where my father would have to acknowledge me and inevitably fall short of it. My father's face changed when I said it. Isla was crying by then, the real kind. There's something at the house I want to show you both, he said. We drove out the next afternoon. My mother let us in without a word, her eyes already on my father. He led us to the hall closet that had been off limits our whole childhood, knelt down, and pulled out a plastic bin. Inside were dozens of envelopes, bundled by year. My own handwriting on every one. Dear Dad. Dear Mom and Dad. Dear family. Letters from basic training, from my first deployment, from every posting and promotion in between. I'd stopped counting somewhere around year 12. You never opened them, I said. It wasn't a question, I could see it in the unbroken seals. I opened the first few, he admitted. You sounded so sure of yourself. Describing places I'd never been, decisions I couldn't picture myself making. It scared me. It made me feel like I didn't know my own daughter. So I stopped. I told myself I'd get to them eventually. And eventually became decades. I sat down slowly, the bin between the 3 of us like something finally excavated. May I read one? I asked. Out loud. I picked one from my first year of training, the paper soft with age. My own younger uncertainty, laid bare. Dear Dad, I know this isn't what you pictured for me. I don't need you to be proud of me right now. I just hope someday you'll want to know what my life actually looks like. That's all I'm asking for. Not applause. Just curiosity. The room went silent. My father put his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking in a way I had never once seen in 46 years, not at funerals, not at anything. I'm sorry, he finally said. For all of it. I don't know how to undo 2 decades of getting this wrong. But I want to try, if you'll let me. I didn't tell him it was fine, because it wasn't, and I was done pretending otherwise for his comfort. But I didn't walk away either. Before I left that night, he found a framed photo at the bottom of the bin, me at 23, freshly commissioned, stiff and proud outside the barracks. He carried it into the living room, found a hammer and a nail, and hung it beside the formal portrait of Isla that had occupied that wall alone for as long as I could remember. He stepped back and looked at both photographs, side by side. There, he said, his voice unsteady. 20 years late. But there. I drove back to Washington the next morning with the sun coming up over the hills, and somewhere along that quiet stretch of highway I realized what I'd actually needed all along was never the apology. It was simpler than that, and harder to ask for. I needed him to finally look at me, not the idea of me he'd built out of fear and old assumptions, but the actual woman standing in front of him. Isla's wedding is in the spring. My father asked, almost shyly, if I'd wear my dress uniform, not to make a statement, he said. Just because he wanted, finally, to see it. I told him yes.